And welcome to the members in the audience. And there's probably folks out in the rest of the world that may be interested. 173, when it came from the House, we felt gave several options, some revenue options, some foundation options, some obviously the federal funds is something we've been learning more as we've gone on, even as early as probably late last night and recently.
I think our point of view is that we appreciate the start the House gave us on that particular issue. And we had the advantage of another week or 10 days research on what the heck the feds really had required.
Sure.
And I think that's reflected in the bill, but we appreciate the start that you all gave us.
Sure. And we'll get to those things. So I think we're going to break it down kind of into three things. One is the school foundation program, i.e. in the model.
Yeah.
And Evan is going to kind of take the lead of that and just kind of lay out where we see the differences. And some is probably similar to what you have, where we see the difference. And I'll take the federal funds component. And then Albert will close us out with the revenue. So as you know, I don't know when you guys are gaveling in, we're gaveling in at 10 o'clock. Okay, so what I guess I'd ask is that we can kind of lay out and we can interact in each bucket if you like to. And then we go our separate ways, convene, and then come back together with, okay, where do we think we are?
Okay.
Does that sound fair
that sounds reasonable.
Later in the morning or early afternoon?
Yeah. And we can discuss a bit as we go. So we
absolutely. Yeah, let's get anything cleared out that we need to as we go. So I guess with that, Mr. Chairman and committees, if Evan, you want to start with the school foundation components that where we have some similarities. We're not going to talk about the similarities, I don't think. Is there any reason to do that, Mr. Chairman? The 80 versus 75% ADM.
Yeah,
we adopted the same thing.
Yeah.
So just on the differences. So Representative Simpson, if you want to take off on that, that would be appreciated.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Welcome, everyone. Appreciate you being here. Senators, there are basically three components within the block grant program which we differ in positions. So let's list them. The first is the idea with the class size adjustment and the teacher salaries, which is in one bucket. The second item is the categorical grant for the teacher's salary.
Let me hold you right there and say, I think we see those three as being one issue. We've got to do one thing or the other on those three together.
Okay. And the third thing is the health insurance component. We differed on 2021 to 22. So I'd like to address each of those if I may, Mr. Speaker. Let's start with the health insurance component. As everyone understands, there are 3,300 employees that are not employees that we're actually paying health insurance for. And so jointly, both chambers agree that we need to make that adjustment. So that really the only separation for us is just the very first year. We both agreed to taper in those reductions, but the first year we had a little difference on how rapidly we should put that in. So the House position was 33 1/3% should be debited to start off with. The Senate's position was they would start off the same as the second year, which was 66.7%. This is one of the few items that we're going to be debating today that we could actually go halvesies on. And so our position is we would propose that we meet you halfway on that, which would be roughly a 50% introduction on that first year.
Let me explain why we did it. It was mostly looking at the interaction of that with the Section 5, the so-called Barlow Amendment. We felt that it was better to take a little more out in that part of the model that if we had a trouble with our courts, that would work a little better. But I don't think we actually feel that strongly about it. The net effect is in terms of total reductions in the model is the same because of the effect of that amendment, and which is we made a very minor technical change to it, but it's basically the same in both houses. So how strongly do you feel about it? We can either go to your position, we can go to our position, or somewhere, we don't have strong feelings, do we?
Mr. Co-Chair, I'm not sure we want to debate. We just would like to
Okay.
present our findings, and then
Okay,
you
that-
guys can
yeah,
actually get together, because I think
that's-
it's more of a holistic approach as opposed to just each component. That's
Yeah,
okay.
okay,
Right.
but be known that one, we're perfectly willing to be agreeable.
Understand. Okay, so I'd like to go on to the second component that there's a difference on. Senators, for years, the school districts have been telling us that our salaries in the model are just too low. To hire and retain quality employees, they need to pay significantly higher. Consequently, in order to do that, they've been put in that awkward place of increasing class sizes. So there's actually 900 employees that we're paying for that don't exist. And that salary is then taken and spread over the other salaries to make it equitable for those employees. So the question is, should we correct up on that? So your proposal to us is that we increase teacher salaries by 8.8. That's all types of teachers, 8.8% across the boards, to increase that number so that we don't put the districts in that bind anymore where they don't have enough money to pay for their employees. And to counter that is the increase in classroom sizes by 2. So this action, the reason those are lumped together is because they are relatively revenue neutral. So roughly 50 million add and 50 million take away is the ballpark of where we're talking about on that. Mr. Chairman, and Mr. Speaker, I think it's important for us to note that when we start talking about classroom sizes, nobody likes to add classroom sizes. And the concept of us adding 2 students to each classroom is a little bit of a misnomer. I think it's very important for both the teacher salaries and the classroom size that we clarify something. Currently, in grade schools, the average is 19 to 21 students in a classroom currently. We're raising it from 16 to 18. So on paper, we're adjusting it. We should not experience additional students in classrooms as a result of this. It's just on paper. We're not adding people to the classroom. Likewise, with the teachers' salaries, I think it's important for our teachers to know that they're probably not going to get an 8.8% increase in their salary. They're already up here, and the models down here, whereas all we're doing is bringing the model closer for the district to be fair with the teachers. So there's probably not going to be a associated pay increase for the teachers as well. So senators, we had this provision in our original bill, and as we worked through to try to get an amenable group in the House, we trimmed it back out. So it's not a foreign idea to us. We're actually fairly warm to that, even though we're going to have to go back and sell it to our House members because they voted to take it out. But that's one of the concessions that we are willing to give to you is to make this adjustment.
If I might, Mr. Chairman, Chairman Scott, if I might also, and this was brought to our attention by staff, is the IFs need to be added into that language because that was inadvertently just left out. So instructional coaches, that's a catch by the good senator on that. And then certainly there's a consequence in the facilities, on the facility size when we change classrooms. So we may see some consequence to that, not in this bill, obviously, but in school facilities as they take this issue up. And I think we should give them, if this advances, we should give them a heads up. So anyway.
And we're aware of those things. What we were hoping was that you would feel the way it sounds like you may feel, that this is a good way to bring the model back in balance and gets rid of a good part of the ghost teacher argument that has poisoned the relation between the two houses for some time. And so we were hoping that this would be something that you would want to agree to. And we did it because we think it's a good idea, and we hope you'll feel the same way about it.
We're warm to
Thank you,
the
Chairman.
idea.
So if you let Evan or
Yeah.
Representative Simpson finish that piece, which has the last
Yeah.
component is, of course, which you lumped together, the categorical
Yeah.
issue, and
Yeah.
we'd like to visit that a little more. Thank you.
So the third item is requires funding for teachers to be calculated as a component of the funding model, but provides a categorical grant outside of the block grant. And it's for the teachers. The concept there, we understand, is to try to protect teacher salaries. We are going to resist this one, and let me explain to you why. We understand the concept, but the timing we would submit to you is not good. The next 3 years, we're going to get significant federal monies that are flowing into our districts. And we think that having this on the table will complicate things and inject some difficulties for our districts that we're not currently imposing. So we would submit to you that this 3 years from now, we think this is a good idea. Right now, we do not. And so our position's fairly firm that we want to keep this out of House Bill 173. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
And I'll just flesh that out a little more. And I think that there's certainly a value, and we've all heard it and said it probably ourselves about, ensuring that the teachers are protected. But I would say that I want to go a step further than that. And this is why the categorical approach to just the salaries isn't, I guess, as acceptable for us. Is I want to actually protect the classrooms, the entirety of what happens in a classroom, not just the individual that actually provides instructions. So with the categorical that is only on the individuals, we're missing, and it's not a very big percentage, but we're missing some latitude for districts and for schools to actually say, we need more supplies, we need this within the realm that a teacher would operate. So that's where our resistance comes from, Mr. Chairman.
I understand what you're talking about there. We do have a provision. You got to look at the Wasserberger Amendment too, that I think just clarifies what was going to be the case. That was the district could move money into that categorical grant, but it couldn't take it out. And we were afraid that we get any kind of a hiccup. The instinct of too many of the districts has been to cut the teachers first. And that's why we put it in. That's a matter we'll have to discuss, because we do see the three of them linked.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Ellis.
Mr. Chairman, and then along those lines, I think in other states nationally, we've seen huge movements to increase teacher salaries. That's something we hear a lot in the interim, particularly in the southwestern part of the state, is how to Sweetwater County, for example, compete with Utah. And so when you see Utah infusing their education systems and other states as well, but targeting that directly at teacher salaries, we're always going to be a disadvantage because we're playing by different rules. I mean, if you look at Utah, I think their class sizes are, for those early grades, are 22, 23 students. So of course they are able to pay higher salaries. And so that's our way of trying to force that a little bit more so that we are competitive with teacher salaries. And my concern remains of, where are we going to cut first? And it should not be teachers. And I think by the 8.8% increase, we're not over flooding that. I think we're hitting that right level. So just some other things to offer, like this wasn't just pulled out of thin air.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I guess one of my largest concerns is aides. Districts employ 600 to 700 aides more than the model provides. Likely some of that money they get for those. And not only that, but they pay them more than the model provides if you look at the salaries. And so to me, some of the problem is how they balance those in-classroom people that are actually part of the educational system, is they probably use some of those, that extra money on the teacher side to put into aides. And there's others as well. There's media, if you look at the media tech group, it's the same thing, more of those than are provided in the salary. So it gets complicated when you carve out and don't understand the interactions between the carve outs.
Okay, let's
Go into the next bucket.
Yep.
Next bucket. All right.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So the next bucket basically is the federal funds bucket, if you will. And this refers to basically, and I'm just going to go to the bill because it's the easiest way for me to track it, is sections 5, section 6, and 8. That of course were added by Senate amendments. 6 and 8 were added by Senate amendments. So the section 5, I mean, I think we're largely on the same page with section 5.
Yeah.
The only thing you added a date, added another year to it to accommodate for the difference in fiscal years between the federal government and state. We're fine with that. We'd further suggest, and maybe this is coloring a little bit outside line, we just give up the 2021. I think as we spoke
We were
with
going
the
to suggest the
superintendent.
same thing to you.
Yeah, as we spoke with the superintendent, and you have too, that we just don't think there's a practical way that 2021, anything's going to get
Yeah,
accomplished.
the
So,
amendment is specific to the,
Right.
not the CARES Act, but the ARP. Yeah.
right. So I think
that's
that's
a
something that we
technical
can do throughout. If
Yeah.
that's something that's agreeable to both sides, we can do throughout. Staff make a note of that. Then the second thing in this section 5 that I think this is based on more learning we're doing about how how we anticipate our executive will roll this out is on page 68, lines 6 through 8. There's
Page 60,
page 68 of the bill.
bill,
Um,
line 6 through 8.
There's just, and I know I'm getting into the technical part.
Well,
there's
but that's
there's
important.
There's a talk about the district shall report allocated amount to the superintendent upon notice. Well, we've learned now that it's a reimbursement process. So that language, the superintendent's going to know exactly what's going out. So it seems to me that we can remove some of that and just go from line 6 after the and go right down to line 8, superintendent shall reduce. Because the superintendent will know exactly what they've been sending out based on what we understand, I think mutually, about the
So
process.
that would be just a technical correction.
I think it's, I think it's just a cleanup of,
I mean,
There's
do you
no
see any
notice
reason
going
we
back
can't
and
agree to
forth.
that?
there's no notice going back and forth. The superintendent's actually making the distribution.
Yeah.
The other thing I would say is, and this goes to the addition of the 3 years or the third years on line 10 after the 2113-309P. Because we have multiple years, we probably actually want to have this calculated on a per year basis. So something about for each school year. Because we have 3 school years in section A of this. Now we're in section B. We don't refer to the same 3 school years. I mean, it's carried forward.
Yeah.
So I just thought that there might be some value in just having that in there, that reduction is going to be individually for the 3 years, because maintenance of effort is on an annual basis.
What's your specific language?
Mr. Chairman, just on line 10 after P, the parentheses P, I just said for each of the school years. And each of the school years refers to 21, 22, 22, 23, 23, 24, which is in A. And I'm just throwing that out there that we don't have just a lump type thing.
Yeah.
We actually try to distribute it. Maintenance of effort, maintenance equity is on an annual basis, or at least the 2
Yeah.
years, even though we may distribute over 3.
Let me say, my inclination is to agree with that. And if we're going to go through this conceptually and come back, can we ask LSO staff to make sure that's not getting us in some kind of unexpected trouble?
Yeah, absolutely. And certainly
Yeah.
I'm just trying to
I think
bring some.
it's a good idea.
All right, so the next one, Mr. Chairman, is on page 69. And this is, this kind of goes into, we didn't, Representative Simpson didn't bring this up about the separate account thing. So this is kind of get into both section 6, which was added by Senate, by a couple of different Senate amendments, and section C. So we actually think most of what you're trying to accomplish that we're agreeable to can be accomplished in section C or is already accomplished in the bill. And I'll point out, so maybe we'll just go to section 6 now and I'll just work backwards. So section 6 talks about deposit in a separate account. Well, and we understand, and just looking at it, that's something you're interested in to keep accountability.
Yeah.
So I'm going to respectfully ask you to take a look at page 60 and 61 of the bill, the bottom of the page.
61.
And this is in the reserve account language. But there's new language that basically talks about accounting for, which shall be separately accounted for, the very bottom of the page, Mr. Chairman, and the top of the next page. So it's separately accounted for and excluded from the reserve amounts. And I think that's, I mean, besides the quote unquote account issue, but I think that's what you're trying to accomplish with at least A of section 6 that you added. So I'm not suggesting that, you know,
I think they do work in parallel, don't they? Do the same thing.
I think they do the same thing, and that's why I would say,
Yeah.
if it's already existing under our current one, this excludes it from this does two things, though. This language does two things. It excludes it from the reserve amount, 15 to 30%, and it accounts for it, requires them to account for it separately. Separate account versus account for separately, you know, I'll let business managers worry about that. But to me, it seems like it accomplishes
Okay.
what you're trying to accomplish. in
Well,
this.
let's make sure we are accomplishing it.
Yep, and that's fine. The one thing that I would say with probably the biggest thing with section 6 is certainly maintaining the maintenance of effort and equity that you brought in when you're section 6B. And that's these aren't numbered, but they're in that section. And we think that I would respectfully suggest that can be brought into our section C as just an amendment, because here in section C, lines 9, 10, and 9 and 10, in our section C, which is on page 69 of the bill.
Okay.
Chairman's making notes, so I'm going to pause for a second.
Section,
So just flip one page back, Mr. Chairman.
section B.
Section C, well, B to C.
Okay, that's what, now.
So if you flip the page back, Mr.
Yeah,
Chairman.
I think.
So we can just go, current language, what we've already agreed to is district's actual receipt of federal funds, maintenance of effort and maintenance of equity could be inserted right there, and then cash flow needs. And that would be in that part of that.
Okay,
part
but
of
we
that.
need to protect the funds further here. So I want to hear the rest of your proposal.
And so if yeah. So maintenance of effort, maintenance of equity is in section C. We think it can be brought to section B of your section 6. We can think it can be brought to section C of our section 5. The other thing obviously in this section 6 on section 5, 2021 gets stricken. We already talked about that. And then I think that we need to actually make sure that we're talking about on a district by district level, not the statewide maintenance of effort. And that's also, I think we should, a correction on, if you go to page 69 and look at line 6, one page back, Mr. Chairman.
9 on 6.
Line 6. So the year changes are here, and that allows each school district. So allows each school district instead of school districts, like it's a collective. This is where I think we can get some of that maintenance of effort, maintenance of equity issue built into 6 as well.
Okay, you've
Line 6, there's an allow, make it plural. Add each, insert each afterwards, and then strike the S off districts, so that each district, we look at, the superintendent's looking at them individually as districts instead of as a collective districts.
okay.
And I think that helps speak to the maintenance of effort. So the last thing I'd say about the federal funds, and then we can certainly open up, is the essential education services, which of course is early in the bill as a definition, if you will, or as a et cetera. Our view is, we think, and in speaking with the superintendent and other folks, is we think we're creating an incongruity between what our educational services are in the block grant and what the federal government is going to allow these funds to be used for. And we've talked about several of these. One is food services, one is HVAC systems, et cetera. Those are certainly not in our block grant, but they are allowable under the federal law. And you've seen the federal law, you know what the allowances
I
are.
know
You know
the
the
federal
allowances,
law is
right.
very broad. Yes.
Very broad, much broader than ours. And so when
What we're concerned about here is that if we allow anything that's allowable under the federal law without using the dollar, right? Do you intend to use the dollar for dollar to a reserve account? That's a key here.
We do not, but we also think more problematic is the state restricting what a district could use federal funds for.
Okay, that's a real sticking point. Because what we're trying to do is preserve as much as we can of that 273 million is going to go to school districts in reserves at the district level. So they're available because we are afraid of what happens when we get the Lizer account drained down to the point where it triggers. And that causes us to go over the cliff, which we think would be disastrous. And so if we're going to accept the federal stimulus, we feel that it's important that we have that. And I understand that you want some more flexibility. I think maybe we can negotiate a compromise in terms of some degree, some monetary degree of flexibility, because they should be able to expand. You're talking here probably in the vicinity of, well, it's less than 10% of the total expenses are coming in with this federal stimulus. If you spread, depending on whether if you spread it over 2 years or 3 years, doesn't make much difference. It's still a relatively small percentage. And the feds authorize expending on a wide range of things. I don't think we're going to have any trouble spending all the federal stimulus money within the model needs. But if you think there needs to be some outside it, that I think is a negotiable position we ought to be able to come to an agreement on. But we do want some restraint there. Otherwise, we think we're going to find very little of it is left when we really need it. And mind you, it's important that we'll spend the federal money directly, and then we'll save a like amount because we're double funding things with the model.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And so I think the language is problematic, not just from the federal side, but on our own side. So the way the bill's written currently, districts that provide some extra food service can't even provide extra food service the way it's written, because your language has tied that up by the definition of essential educational services.
Yeah.
And then my other concern is we're trying to do this one-to-one shift when the federal government clearly says we want to use 20% of these dollars to catch kids up. And you can say, well, we don't have any kids to catch up in Wyoming because of COVID. And I don't think that's accurate. And so there may be a need to double dip just in order to get kids caught up and to do other things. And so I am very reluctant to put this language in there. I think what we can carve off the top, I'm good with that. But when we start getting down into this nitty gritty stuff and we're too refined on that, I think we lose the intent behind the federal dollars to begin with. And it's just my opinion.
I guess the only last thing, so that's 5 and 6. We kind of understand, I think, if there's any questions. Let's see, 5, 6, 7. So we have, this is section 7, which is the reorganization language. So consolidation, reorganization, I think is what the report on reorganization is what the report will be. We were State Board of Education. You folks took an executive branch approach, executive task force approach. I think where we'd be really comfortable is in between, and it's the superintendent of public instruction. Just establishes does a study that, and certainly that individual can currently happens to be Superintendent Balo can, do a task force or not, or however you'd like. But that seems to be an obvious place in the middle of a statewide elected. You had an executive type approach. We had a appointed board type approach, and maybe that's in the middle. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And this is something that, I think can always be looked at in a different light. I think my concern with the State Board of Education is I think we forget that they're private citizens who do this work on top of their 9 to 5 jobs. And I do want to be protective of their time. I think that the the State Superintendent of Public Instruction can pull these resources, have a conversation with the governor and get the information they need. But ultimately, what we're looking for is some objectivity. And, when we do a legislative meeting, those aren't always, or legislative task forces, they're not always so objective. So I'd be fine with looking at alternatives on that board.
And we're good with your date extension. You had added a year, I think, to the, so we're good with that if you want to consider the potential of the state board, or the superintendent's addressing that. And that's section 7, section 8. We don't know that it's necessary based on, the comments that the good chairman talked about earlier, that we don't think we're going to be approaching that loss of maintenance of effort or equity, but it's a backstop. And so if we think it needs to stay in, we're amicable to that. The section 8 was, it came forth in 2 different amendments, actually. Both of those, and we're certainly the second one, receiving the funds is fine. And then the top one, that's the backstop for maintenance of effort on the district level. And we think unless staff suggests we have it covered somewhere else, we're fine with leaving that in.
So we can do that one either way. Okay.
So I think the last small thing to the stool that we tried to send over was the revenue piece, and Majority Floor Leader Summers will walk through that approach from our perspective.
Send that down. So I'm just passing around a chart I had staff made that kind of looks at
Really small.
the big picture. So I guess the first thing I want to talk about is what is our challenge in education funding? And so we have roughly a $250 million a year deficit on the operations side and about a $50 million a year deficit or shortfall on the school capital construction side. So really in this bill, we're really talking about the operations side of things. And so we're looking at that $250 million a year. And so if you guys look at the chart down there, and if you look at the bottom one, if you just assume that we'll get if the spending policy comes into play, to get the 5% spending policy, you can see that the LISRA refuel, basically the earnings off, the investment income off that we had brought into the bill. And you look down at the bottom line in 2026, and you go across and you look at the House position, and this would include, I believe, the reductions we had in the model with health insurance. You can see that we have reduced the shortfall by $212 million with the half-cent sales tax and the revenue flows and the reductions. And so basically we've reduced what was a $250 million shortfall. We take a $212 million bite out of that apple, and we really come close to solving the problem. And so I wanted to highlight that before I go into the rest. And so that's with a half-penny sales tax. A half-penny sales tax is about $80 million a year. So understanding the Senate may have a reluctance to a sales tax. The option that we would bring forth is on the LISRA refuel. So on that piece of the investment income off the PTMS that's split between the SIPA and the LISRA. In the bill, we had that next split going half to the school foundation program and half to the LISRA. So in this revised, because we're losing 80 million on the the half-cent sales tax, we would go to a 2/3 LISRA on the LISRA refuel going to the SFP. And then on the 1% severance tax, we had a 1/3 going to the school foundation, 2/3 going as it currently exists in law to the permanent mental trust fund, the corpus as it is current law. And we would change that to a 50-50 split. So it would be 50% going to school foundation program and 50% going to the permanent account. And then on the LISRA refuel, we would like to guarantee that spending policy. And then there's an issue that we don't want to raise, and Don can explain this a lot better than me, but we don't want to raise the general funds, which is either the general fund of schools or the general fund of during this period that we're receiving the federal dollars. So it would be our idea that for those 2 years, for 2022 and 2023, that we capture that money in the SFRA. So that's the School Foundation Program Reserve Account. I think there's currently about 400,000 sitting in it. That was created as basically the LISRA for the school. And so for those 2 years, we would capture that flow in there. It takes further legislative authorization to move it out. And then after those 2 years, those flows would continue to just go straight into the School Foundation Program. And so that would be, we wouldn't capture the flows that are going to the LISRA or the flows that are going to the permanent account. They would still go like they would, but that we captured for School Foundation for those 2 years needs to be held up in a separate account and not be part of the school general fund to be consistent with federal law. And so really by doing that, if you take a look roughly, those revenue flows will amount to about 100 million a year. You look at the cuts we have, it's about 43 million a year in cuts. That gets up to 143 million a year out of the 250 million a year shortfall, realizing, that in investment earnings are investment earnings. But so that's our proposal back. If you're not interested in the sales tax, then and it's still not a straight trade on the 80 million. I think we take about 27 million more versus what was the 80 million.
Okay. Now, I'm not sure I fully understood that, but let me say on the sales tax, I took the precaution of giving the Senate an up and down choice to see where they really stood, because I wasn't sure. And the vote surprised me how strong it was. It was 25 were against it. And we couldn't do that, just the mechanics on the standing committee amendment, brought it back in a second reading, so we got a roll call. That says to me, if I come back with a sales tax in here, I can't sell it. I just can't. So I'm afraid that has to be our position on the sales tax. The problem part of the problem in the diversion part of it is that this is what the third bill that's diverting the same pocket of money. Senator Steinmetz is from the Appropriations Committee, and I'm going to ask her to explain the problems we have there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So we have, this is the third bill diverting those funds, and you guys are well aware of that. And I would have to have a piece of paper in front of me to look at your proposal that you just put out for us, because you went through it pretty quickly for a new member of the Appropriations Committee as well. But so in the budget, we're dividing the 1% sales or severance tax 50-50 between the common permanent land fund for schools and the PMTF. So we're putting that into savings and hoping to generate earnings off of that. That was something we all adopted. And so that is for the rest of this year. And I think it'll generate about $64 million for each account there. And then we have House or Senate File 121, which we're diverting 1/3 to the school permanent land fund and 2/3 to the PMTF. And so those are the other two bills that are out there that we need to work within. Clearly, the Senate has taken a position that we'd like to save money and use the earnings to fund all of our government, including the schools. And so I think that's something we would have to really talk about, our diversions, especially for this first year and getting the ARP money in. I wonder if we just need a pause on the talking about reversions to see how things play out, and then we could address it. We'll be back in session fairly soon again, and we have that allocated in the budget now. But those are some of the things we've been talking about. Of course, we're always open to visiting more and seeing your proposal and working through it in a slower manner so that we understand completely what you're proposing.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. And Senator Steinmetz, thank you for that, because I did leave out a critical piece that we would put controlling language in this bill. So this bill would control. Certainly as it relates to the budget bill and what would be left of, I think, 2022, I think I wouldn't mind compromising that piece, just leave that 2022 like it is. But the 2023 then would have to go into the SFRA, and then after that it would flow. And so, yeah, we know there's other bills out there, but I think this is something. If you all, and we realize that if you're not willing to go with the sales tax, then I think these flows and in the manner we described them is a pretty firm position of ours.
So, and I'll respectfully say to the chairman and to my colleagues, Senate colleagues, is we'll provide this to staff, and they can map it out for you, so understand, you see exactly where we are in the comparison between the other bills, so that in the intervening time, you'll have a chance to review that. We do have a diagram, but it's probably not as full of explanation. We understand what we did with it, but you're at a bit of a disadvantage. So we'll ask staff to map that out and to give the fiscal consequences to the different, including the other bills. So thank you.
And we will talk, because the other bills have some strong proponents in our appropriations committee. And we will talk to them and see how strongly they feel about what. I am a little concerned, as I heard it, and correct me if I'm wrong, you were diverting some of the earnings off the permanent mineral trust fund to something other than the general fund.
So in the original bill that you guys struck, we had 1/2 of the investment earnings that were headed towards the LISRA. Half of those were going towards the school foundation in the bill originally that came to your house. And I'm suggesting that comes back and is not just a half, but is 2/3 now, because we have now lost the half penny, the sales tax. And in the other instance, we had 1/3 of the 1% severance going to the school foundation program in the bill as it came to you, and 2/3 was still going to the permanent account. And so in this new proposal, without the sales tax, we want 50% of that going to the school foundation program. Obviously, we need to put it in a coffee can 1 year to oblige the worries over the federal dollars. I would be willing to concede the 2022 to the budget bill, but that's kind of our position.
I would raise a special concern with the earnings off the permanent mineral trust fund. You do have a constitutional provision, I believe, that has to go in the general fund. And I can see that people saying, well, the LISRA is the equivalent of the general fund, because we certainly use it that way. But you put it in school foundation fund where you're mixing it with things that are restricted to the schools constitutionally and I think by the act of admission. You cause some complications there. And I get concerned about, does it match with the constitutional requirement? And in general, the Senate is skeptical of some of these efforts we think that ultimately the way that we're going to have to do first is reduce some of the education spending. We sent you a proposal which became moot because of what the feds did to us. So that argument's probably passed off a couple of years. But ultimately, I think to sell some of this to the Senate, you gotta show more reductions in the school spending where we think there are some excesses. But that will illustrate some of the difficulty we'll have with this on the floor.
Just one thing, Mr. Chairman. And Don Richards can correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that funding schools is part of the general appropriations of government. So it's not an exclusionary thing. That's why you can make reductions in the budget or increases in the budget on schools, because it is a general appropriation of government.
And I would very much agree with that point of view, but it has been treated segregated and it has not seen what you've seen in other areas. Now, I would cut the other areas harder first the way we have, but not to the extent we have. It's not been treated as if it were general government appropriations, and probably should be. But that's, you get into a philosophical argument.
And thank you, Mr. President, or Mr. Chairman. So I think we only have the cuts that are on the table between us
Yeah.
at this
We gotta
point.
do
So
that.
that, the other thing I just offer respectfully is the Lizard by current law is the backstop for education. So all we're doing is taking some of that Lizard
Yeah.
funds and putting it one step closer within the foundation program, one step closer, changing maybe not the actual deficit, but the paper deficit, so that we're actually doesn't look like we have this. But I think it is real. I think it is real, and it sends a message to our folks. We're trying to solve a problem. So
Right.
with that, Mr. Chairman, I don't know if that clock is right, but
But
I've-
you've
let's
got
finish
duties
up.
upstairs.
Well, we all will soon.
Yeah.
So, but let's try to wrap up and then we can come back together. Just from our perspective, we will ask staff to draft up a sheet that shows that the diversion
Okay.
issue for you
We will
folks.
consult with our
All
other
right.
members about.
Perfect.
that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay.
Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, I just want to make sure that I want to fairly characterize it. In years past, we're always really reluctant to profile investment earnings because we never know what they're going to be. Is it fair to say that that's what we're starting to do now with some of these diversions, is profiling, earmarking, dedicating these funds? I just get really nervous about, that's been a practice of the legislature, not to rely on money we don't know and how that's going to perform, but it sounds like that's our new plan. Is that a fair characterization or not? I just want to make sure I'm understanding it correctly.
Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you. And I believe on the guarantee, I think currently the SIPA is guaranteed, so it's not new policy entirely. And as far as dedicated, we already have 45% of the SIPA dedicated to basically school capital construction, major maintenance, and earmarking is throughout statute.
Mr. Chairman, for our guests, could we give them an approximate time of when we might think we can reconvene? So just so they're not hanging around the Capitol all day. I know there's variables.
Mr. Speaker, I think we've got this room reserved for the rest of the day, I think. What do you have any estimate of what your schedule is going to be up in the House? Initially, you thought maybe we could meet at 11, but
Yeah.
if that's going to be a problem.
Well, I guess there's two questions. One, we need to get some information to you folks regarding the diversions and that information. So that staff will, I think, be able to turn around that relatively quickly, hopefully. And then, and of course, any advice that they might have, any of the discussions we had about language we were taking in or out, we certainly, I would hope we would both invite any suggestions that they may have. So I can't imagine that on the House floor will be done before 11:30. So if it's easier to wait until 1 o'clock and just convene at 1 o'clock here, and we'll do, or if you want to try to do 2 smaller segments, certainly it's our hope to get done, early mid-afternoon if we can get to that point and go from there. So
1 o'clock acceptable?
Mr. Chairman, and just if I may make a request, I know there have been prior years where we've gone late into the evening, where we're hitting that 11:59 hour. I certainly just want to emphasize, I don't do my best work, and I do think it puts a cloud over the work we do, and not being transparent and having meetings like this during reasonable hours. So to the extent that we can get something resolved by the end of reasonable working hours today, I think that would be certainly appreciated from our end.
Oh, I think we all share that. Everything I own is packed up in my vehicle. I'm ready to go home too.
I think we will try to work up a proposal for a compromise on that issue of protecting the federal stimulus funds that go to the district are protecting the effect of spending them is probably a more correct way to state it. We're clearly going to spend them on the stuff within the federal and spend them currently because that's federal requirements. But then we've got that transfer to reserves provision. We'll try to bring you a proposal on that. It seeks to reach a compromise between the position of two houses.
And I appreciate that, Mr. Chairman. Actually, we actually have some language, and if it actually fits in the block grant, then absolutely, we want to capture that value. But if there's things outside of that,
Well,
and maybe we leave that discretion to the superintendent, because they're the ones that are going to be reviewing these applications, sending the money out, et cetera. So maybe we have them try to be the
but I
capture.
think we need some kind of limitation on that. We've got a difference in approach between the two houses. That's a classic budget thing we can come to an agreement on.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.